what we've got is another illustration of the United States being the empire of lies. I think it was Lazov, the Russian foreign minister, that coined that term. Either way, here we go again. So we're meant to be into diplomacy. We're meant to be into, I will make up my mind. And I think, a day after Trump gives the go ahead. Now, in terms of the details, I simply haven't got them. I've been in a meeting all day. I haven't sort of caught up with the news. Maybe the information still isn't there. My understanding is extremely minimal. There's been a strike on Fordo, Nantes, and Estafan. And the news I heard was that American bombers had delivered their full load and had all returned safely. Now, returned where? I don't know. I'm guessing Guam, but that's just a guess. I don't think it would be in the Indian Ocean, i.e., Diego Garcia, because that would have required British permission. So I haven't read anything along those lines. That's perfectly feasible. It would have been perfectly feasible if these had been, and I'm guessing that they are B-2s. These are the stealth, huge Batwing US aircraft. And I'm guessing that their full load consisted of, and again, that's just a guess, a full load of two 30,000-pound bunker busters. So two bombs apiece. My guess, for what it's worth, is that it would have been delivered one, then a second. In my own supplement for this week's paper, talking about that as a possibility, I talked about, because I've been reading military experts, that it would have taken several runs to do Fordo. Now, again, I don't know whether that was several runs or was it just one aircraft with two. I just don't know. The statement I've read is that their mission was successful. On the other hand, we have been told by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which monitors these things, that there's been no release of radioactive material. One of the explanations there is that it's been moved. I know no more than that. That's about it. In terms of the significance, though, politically, of course, it's enormous. I mean, the Israeli assault on Friday the 13th was of enormous significance. My guess at the time, and again, this is just guesswork, is that not only, of course, did the United States give the go-ahead for that, I just don't think there's any doubt about that. It wouldn't have happened without the US giving the green light. But in my estimate, there had to be either the United States was going to wait for Iran to do something that it could have said, well, thus far you've crossed a line, or something like that. But it had to involve the United States active involvement, precisely because if, as it has been the stated aim, if the aim is to get rid of Iran's nuclear facilities, given at least with Fordo how deeply it's buried underground, and not only underground, but under layers of concrete and layers of steel, there's only one country that could do that job, barring, an invasion or some special forces operation, which I don't think is practical. Only one country could do that operation. That's the United States. It could have perhaps loaned these planes to Israel, but given, I would guess, what is required to train up on them to deliver this particular device, maybe not. And it's only recently that the pen is dropped with me of how few planes we're actually talking about. We're not talking, nowadays about 1,000 bomber raids. I think that in terms of the number of B-2s that the United States has in its air force, and this is just sort of, a fact let in the back of my head, it will be something like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, certainly no more than that. Either way, we've seen the United States attack. Now, does this mean, again, speculation, that Trump turns around to Israel and says, well, enough is enough, let's go to negotiations? Again, maybe you know more than I do, but I don't think so. I don't think the actual aim of Israel, anyway, is simply to see Iran's nuclear program thrown back. My guess is that this is about dismembering Iran, throwing Iran into barbarism, decapitating the state. And of course, as Moshe's argued, I've argued, this also goes hand in hand with Israel, quoting Trump, finishing the job. And I don't think just in Gaza, but also the West Bank and also Israel proper. And again, just doing a Google search last night, I came across a statement by some Israeli spokesperson. This is in light of the possibility of European countries led by France recognizing a Palestinian state, and Israel, this is in the middle of last month, Israel responded by saying that if you do that, there's the possibility of us going ahead and annexing the West Bank. And so I think this is the sort of territory that we're in. We're into Israel getting rid of people. We're into Israel, declaring annexation, but also think, all the indications are there that this isn't going to be a short, sharp shock. This is going to be a prolonged military operation. So, as it says in Numbers, the war will continue until the enemy or the enemy is slain and the blood is drunk. That's what it says. Is it Numbers 23, verse 24? So that's my estimate when it comes to that. Now, again, worthwhile asking the question, was Iran weeks away from developing 9 nuclear warheads and putting them on a ballistic missile? All the evidence seems to be no. Iran wasn't there. My own argument would be that even if it was there, it would have held back. I think that if you look at Iran's nuclear program, clearly it's not about civilian use. I think that's unarguable. You don't go for 60%, you don't go for 60% plus enriched uranium if that is your intention. On the other hand, Iran is still a signature for the Non-Proliferation treaty. It was found to be in breach by a political vote. But then the idea that we're meant to buy into is if, and it's a huge if, Iran had mastered the technology, had mated, the uranium, the enriched uranium that it's got, carried on to 95% or whatever the exact formula is, and mated that with a missile, would the Ayatollah, would the supreme leader instantly say, I now have 9, ballistic missiles, launch, give the order to launch, these missiles against Haifa, Tel Aviv? In other words, is, Iran committed to the physical destruction of Israel as if they're guided by some death wish? And my answer to that is no. In the same way, although in my assessment, Israel is committed to the dismemberment or the destruction of the existing regime in Tehran, that doesn't mean it's about to launch its 140 or whatever the particular number of nuclear devices. It is most certainly capable of delivering from sea or from land or from the air. Merely because you've got the ability to do it, it doesn't mean you would do it. Why? Because unless you look at the Iranian leadership and you think that they got a death wish, any nuclear attack on Israel by 9 missiles, if that's all they've got, you launch all of them, you hope that some of them would get through, what would happen? Israel would respond by literally unleashing its nuclear arsenal against Iran, with the death of tens and tens of millions. And of course, the leadership in Iran know that. Why are these nuclear devices there? Whatever the calculation is, one of the calculations most certainly is that if we do have the bomb, and we do have the ability to deliver this bomb, they won't attack us. They're there for deterrent. They're not there simply because if you've got it, you would unleash it. So hence, if you look at the Cold War, what do we have? The doctrine of mutually assured destruction. In other words, both sides look at each other, and while they recognize that they're a bit crazy and might use the bomb, they would only use the bomb, this is the calculation, if we use the bomb, and we won't use the bomb because we know that if we use the bomb, they would use the bomb, and we both end up destroyed. So we can't buy into, at least I don't buy into the idea that the mullahs are mad, that Iran just wants to see the destruction of Israel. Of course, it wants to see the end of Israel as a Zionist regime. Of course, it dreams of an Islamic Palestine, but this isn't going to be achieved, through nuclear war, or for that matter, a nuclear threat. So why is Israel engaging in war? Precisely because it views Iran as a regional rival, and it wants to eliminate it. And I think that is what is going on, and that the change is in Washington, where Obama, where Biden, and where other presidents have held back Israel, from this long-held aim. At last, they've got someone in the White House who's prepared to give them the go-ahead, and indeed join in that project of decapitating, dismembering the Iranian regime. Okay, I've already mentioned Israel itself, its other aim, and it's true. If we look at headlines, they've shifted, from reporting starvation, the forcible, or should we call it semi-forcible? I mean, what do you do if you're starving? there's offer of food. Well, people are delivering themselves up to Israeli guns. That's been the headlines, but they've shifted from that to what the United States, what Israel is doing. Our position is quite clear. We are for the defeat of Israel. We are for the defeat of the United States, and we're also for the defeat of Britain. And Britain is quite clearly complicit in this. You know, Keir Starmer, David Lammy talk about negotiations. But the fact of the matter is that Britain is locked in, not only in terms of being a minor, what is it, 15% of an F-35 is manufactured, as my understanding is, by British firms, but by being in NATO, by being the closest ally to the United States. Britain is locked in to this war. And, you know, while, you know, it's not impossible to imagine the government changing line, it's very hard to imagine it because it would pay a huge price to make such a decision. It would have to be almost a threat of revolution in Britain to get the British government to break its alliance with the United States. So we are in favor of the defeat of our own side, because Britain, in spite of its talk of a diplomatic solution, is actually, you know, part of the coalition of war against Iran. Okay, when it comes to Iran itself, though, I think we need to adopt a different position. We don't take the view of, you know, that this is World War I. The world today, in many senses, resembles, you know, the run-up to World War I. You know, so in terms of Ukraine, I look at Ukraine and don't just go, I sympathize for the ordinary Ukrainian people. But when Russia invaded, I didn't just go, poor little Ukraine. You know, there's the big bully, Russia. I had to look at it. And I think this is the point, you know, about history. You have to look at things in historic context. And my first question is, well, how did the present Ukrainian regime get there? How comes the country was split, you know, in the east with a Russian zone and a Ukrainian speaking zone? You know, how did we get to a situation of where the Crimea was part of Ukraine? All of these questions come in, and crucially, who the hell's been supplying arms to Ukraine, not least when the war proper starts. This wasn't simply a Ukrainian war, this has been a NATO war. And therefore, we also looked at it in the context of what we viewed as the United States' grand strategy, which is to weaken, maybe to dismember Russia, but also to target and stop the rise of China. So we didn't simply respond on the basis of defend Ukraine against the big power bully, Russia. We said defeat for the Russian side. Yes, that's absolutely right. But we also said defeat for the Ukrainian side, because the Ukrainian side is our side. It is Trump's side. It is Starmer's side, or whatever the Tory prime minister. We've had so many of them over recent years. But, you know, Liz Truss, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, it's their side as well. Now, in all honesty, I cannot take that position with Iran. You know, I've heard comrades talk about World War III, and that's not wrong to look at the world and say that it's pregnant with big power conflict. But looking at Iran and the danger of an Israeli attack, which we've all been expecting, the particular moment, you know, might have taken us by surprise. The particular involvement of when, certainly as I've illustrated, took me by surprise. I gave it a couple of weeks at least. But the actual involvement of the United States, that doesn't come as a surprise. But is Iran operating as a proxy of Russia stroke China? And, is this a prelude, for the involvement of Russia stroke China? And my answer to that was no. Yes, there's, how should I put it, a loose alliance between Russia and Iran. There's a loose alliance between Iran and China, but we're not talking about the sort of alliance that if Iran is attacked, automatically, China, Russia is going to involve itself. Quite the opposite. And what we've seen is verbalese, but we haven't seen, and we shouldn't expect threats of retaliation by Russia and China. So we're not in the same situation of, Russia and Serbia, or Britain, France, and Belgium. There's no diplomatic agreement that if you're attacked, we will join in. So I don't see this as simply big power conflict. Of course, we can't ignore the big powers here, but precisely until that changes, our position, at least on the, if we could silence, if we could, if we could silence whoever it is, it would help me. Thank you.
I did.
Thank you very much. We don't see on the PCC this being a directly analogous situation, and therefore, until that change takes place, we take the position precisely of not calling for revolutionary defeatism in Iran, but the exact opposite. That what we are for is the defense of Iran. Now, we need to investigate what that means. Certainly, as I said, when it comes to Britain, we're in favor of demonstrations against the war. We're in favor of workers boycotting. Obviously now, not only Israel, goods bound for Israel, but war goods bound for America, bound for Israel. We're against the involvement of the RAF. We're against the involvement of the Royal Navy. But what about Iran itself? What we begin with would be by raising a particular sort of defense. So, for example, I know that in Tehran, and I don't know to what extent, but my understanding is that the authorities have given the go-ahead, for example, to opening the metro system as somewhere that people can take shelter in. I know that, from my history books, that was certainly a demand of the left, of the Communist Party in World War II. They actually took the lead in opening up the tube, as we call it, but they also took the lead in opening up elite bomb shelters, elite basements, and they occupied, to demonstrate that, places in Mayfair, places in the West End. There ought to be a similar series of demands. Also, something that was put into practice during the Iraq-Iran war, there needs to be a system of rationing. From our angle, demands would certainly be just if such a measure was democratically or involved some sort of democratic oversight. And, one such suggestion, for example, is given the inadequacy of the authorities in Tehran when it came to COVID-19, for example, there was a considerable degree of self-organization by the Iranian people themselves when it came, for example, to looking after the elderly. when it came to looking after the sick, when it came to making sure that people got fed. Similar measures can be taken now. That, you know, mutual aid would be something that could be justified, but also would give that sort of room of self-organization where the left could find itself getting the ear of the masses. So from our angle, certainly the left should not be in a position, which I'm sure they're not thinking about it, of staging some stupid demonstration in Tehran or any other city welcoming Israeli bombs or American bombs. No doubt that's the position of the royalists. That's the position of MEK. That's why these people will not find a popular hearing, as if they ever could. My understanding is that MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq, is not only seen as a tool of the Americans and the Israelis, you know, during the Iran-Iraq war, for example. I think they actually staged some sort of invasion. Didn't get very far, but, you know, I've seen the pictures of MEK tanks rolling in from Iraq. So that these people are not viewed as anything other than what they are, which is half crazy cult backed by the far right in the United States. And the royalists aren't any different. And the only people that really retain any sort of fondness for the royalists in Iran are upper class people who look back at the Shah's regime as some sort of example of an enlightened despotism, you know, the white revolution and all the rest of it. Ordinary people, you know, in terms of their parents, maybe now their grandparents, got rid of that hated regime, which was viewed as, you know, being put there quite rightly by the British and the Americans in the anti-democratic coup. The Shah was seen as not only a creature of US imperialism, but he was also seen as, you know, a deeply reactionary autocrat. And the idea of ordinary people rallying to his son is pretty hard to swallow. So the left in Iran needs to find itself a hearing, needs to find ways to operate. That's not for us to lay down. We're just saying that, you know, that inventive measures need to be used. So, you know, for example, and again, I'm not drawing any direct parallel, quite the opposite. But so, for example, in Tsarist Russia, you know, the left found itself in a position, of course, forced underground, and found its way back, for example, through production committees that were established by the Tsarist authorities for reasons that you wouldn't be surprised at, getting munitions out, getting bayonets out, getting soldiers' uniforms out, that to collaborate with that is also a way to get the hearing of the masses. So again, using Russian words, what we're advocating is genuine revolutionary defensism. Why genuine? Well, because in Russia, what we saw with the right wing of the Mensheviks and the right wing of the socialist revolutionaries is a verbal commitment to ending Tsarism, but an actual commitment to Tsarism because of its alliance with the so-called democracies, Anglo-French imperialism. And we all know, thanks to the Bolsheviks and Leon Trotsky, the first foreign minister of the Soviet Republic, that when the Tsar was overthrown, the provisional government, which consisted of a few or one socialist to begin with, but in the end, a majority of socialists, they remained committed to the war aims of Tsarism and Anglo-French imperialism, which included, for example, Russia getting access to the warm waters of the Mediterranean through the incorporation, I think it was still called Constantinople at the time. But no, what we're talking about is not just stopping at getting an ear of the masses. We're also talking about, well, if Iran, and I don't really like this term, so if anyone's got a suggestion, I'm willing to junk it, but to make Iran worth defending, and we're talking about its territorial integrity. We're not talking about, of course, Iran one and indivisible. We do stand for the right of the Baluchis. We do stand for the right of Kurds to self-determination. We just want them to exercise it voluntarily in unity with the Persian speakers, with the Farsi speakers in Iran. And to make that worthwhile, to make that possible, then there has to be democracy in Iran. There has to be a separation of mosque and state. There has to be the right of national self-determination. There has to be full cultural rights. There has to be religious freedom. There also has to be trade union freedom. We don't want to talk about, Islamic trade unions. The workers need to be free to organize in their own interests. And we also would put forward in that sort of spirit the idea of demands being put on the government, so cancel the foreign debt, measures like that. But would also add one thing, that in Iran, proletarian internationalism isn't some additional afterthought. It's absolutely integral to rescuing the Middle East and the world from the disaster course that we are on. And so, proletarian internationalism has to have a regional aspect to it, and it has to have an aspect to it that's got a chance of getting a sympathetic hearing, not just in Israel proper, but amongst Israeli Jews, the Hebrew people themselves. There has to be something that they say, we want to put an end to these attacks on Iran. We want to actually join with Iran in our own class interests. And that also doesn't stop in the Middle East. It must include Britain. It must include the United States. It must go into the US Air Force. It must go into workers that are making F-35s and other munitions, in Europe and in the United States. Why? Because what we're dealing with here is an aerial war. And one thing that you can guarantee, and it's a big if, I know, but if, for example, there was a working class revolution that overthrew the Ayatollahs, American and Israeli attacks would be joined by others in the region, and they would be intensified to a massive degree. We cannot come out with the idea, and it would be a lie, and we don't lie. We try not to lie anyway. We can make mistakes. We would say that if the working class comes to power in Iran, it's not able to turn around and say, look how wonderful things are in Iran. Look at our economic prosperity. Look at our shining example of living standards, going up. We've expropriated the bourgeoisie. Look how well off we are. We cannot promise that, because that is not going to be the case. That our comrades in Iran would be bombed, besieged, and they would be desperate. Perhaps inspiration will be provided by the fact that they've come to power and they've overthrown a hated regime. That is true. And in the, the so-called Arab street, that provides inspiration. That's a possibility. And it's possible that in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, workers can be inspired by that. Workers in London, Birmingham, workers in Dallas and Houston and Los Angeles and Seattle can be inspired by that. But that would be the working class coming to power, not because we are, some sort of shining example of prosperity to be emulated. That's the illusion, the fatal illusion that's peddled by the advocates of socialism in one country, and that is a lie. And that is something we are not going to indulge in. Okay. Okay, so just to finish that section, that's taken 38 minutes. So what we need to be talking about is going beyond in Britain, in Israel, in the United States, in France, in Germany. The left needs a strategy of going beyond the politics of protest. We need the politics of power. And if we're serious about that, and we've got to be serious about that, the first thing, the most important thing that we can do now is grasp the party question with both hands. That's the key to where we are. Yes, it will be great. I was quite surprised, to tell the truth, by yesterday's demonstration. I really was expecting, not obviously because of the United States, but because of Israel, this demonstration to be much bigger than the previous one, which was huge. The organizers report 350,000. And again, I'm not there counting, but I did stay to the bitter end. I saw the last, demonstrators coming in, followed by the police wagons. That was about 2:30. So, a big demonstration, a respectably sized demonstration, but not an enormous demonstration. And just to illustrate our problem, and the line that we're trying to tread, I just illustrate it by saying that there were those comrades on the demonstration that were quite rightly saying a defeat for Israel, defeat for the United States, defeat for Britain. That's absolutely right. And we're on their side. But we also saw them shouting, not only defend Iran, but victory to Iran. And what they mean by victory to Iran is not the sort of victory I've been talking about. What they mean is the victory to the theocratic regime. And to illustrate that, there were also there with people carrying placards that said victory to Iran, along with the Ayatollah's flag. So that is not what we're talking about. We don't think that is the correct way forward. We don't think that is something that you would expect Kurdish, comrades to buy into. They might be at the moment, I don't know. But no, we're putting forward the idea that to defend Iran, to keep Iran together, there has to be democracy, and the only class that can secure a genuine democracy is the working class, and the only class that can spread, which is what it needs, spread the flame of liberation, spread the flame of freedom, is the working class organized on an international scale. It's a big ask at the moment. That's true. And I therefore come, and I'm going to finish my remarks today, but just updating comrades on the Forging Communist Unity process. We are not interested in interfering, not because of some diplomatic agreement, but we would rather organizations sort themselves out. They have their democracy. We didn't, for example, suggest to anybody on the Promethean editorial board that they form a pro-talks faction. We're not going to suggest that in talking about socialism. That's entirely up to them. But what I would say is that in terms of if there are those that don't want to pursue unity at the moment with the CPGB, that's fine, because we've committed ourselves not to instant fusion, but a process. And we've emphasized throughout, slowly as necessary. We're not in a rush. Although I've talked about what I've talked about, we can't bounce people into unity. We're not threatening people with a unity conference. We're saying we should have a unity conference when we're ready. When comrades trust us, that has to be the case. And what we're arguing, and this is all we're arguing, isn't some ultimatum that we've suggested. The only thing that we're insisting on is the right of the CPGB. That's all, of putting forward our draft program, potentially as one of two, one of three, one of four, I don't know, different drafts. Maybe that conference decides democratically to delay the adoption of a draft program. That's up to a conference. What I should explain, and because I've heard it secondhand, and I think it is worth saying, that when it comes to the CPGB, or the organization that has the name CPGB, we're not the CPGB. We've taken the name that gives us the association with a good history, also a bad history. I'm well aware of the bad history, but it does take us back to 1920. It does take us back to the Communist Manifesto, the Third International, good, bad, and sometimes worse than that. But no, what I wanted to stress here is that almost certainly what we'll be putting forward is not our introduction that we have at the present to our draft program, that simply says this is where we've come from. That, in other words, the CPGB this is a faction of the CPGB. This is not a detailed history, but this is sort of, we haven't come out of thin air. We're not Athena, emerging from the head of Zeus. And we would, recommend, if we did adopt a program together between Prometheus and TAS, that we'd also do some sort of introduction. Organizations that claim to, come out of nowhere have got something to hide, in my opinion. We're not like that. We're simply saying that this is our history. This is where we've come from. And so, yeah, we'd need a new introduction. So we're not insisting on that, nor are we insisting, although we'd put it forward separately, the existing rules, draft rules, as part of a draft program. They're two separate documents. So we'd like to hear from comrades, where the differences are. We think there are differences. We think the differences are containable. We think the differences potentially are very important, but therefore what we rely on is comrades accepting majorities and minorities. And all we would say is, having been in a minority many times, as long as we've got the ability and we can freely publish and freely argue, and there's a democratic conference, as long as we see the possibility of becoming the majority, that's all we ask. But we would also say that minorities also have responsibilities, especially at the present time. And of course, it's much more difficult, much less pleasant being in a minority than it is in a majority. But unless we have majorities and minorities, unless we get rid of democratic votes, amendments, points of order, the norms of democracy, and I don't think that would be the right way forward. We've got to find our way forward. And I think it is through debate, extensive debate, but ultimately by binding decisions where minorities accept, their status with all the provisions that I've made. Just one final point, and again, this is on the basis of hearsay, so it might not be accurate, so apologies if I'm inaccurate here, but I've been told that Mike McNair's last article, where he was dealing with the question of communist unity, I think this was with Mike's reply to Peter Kennedy, Comrade Peter Kennedy of TASS, that Mike talked about, well, the chances are at the moment, and looking around at what I've just said, who could argue? The chances are that what we're facing is some sort of nuclear exchange. And he's not talking clearly about the United States just about to drop the bomb on Iran, although that's possible, but I would discount it. He's not talking, of course, about Iran dropping the bomb on Israel. No, we're talking about a 21st century version of World War. Apparently, that isn't offering the workers anything positive. Well, again, I come back to the question, do we tell the truth as we see it? I wouldn't put it in Mike's way, but Mike wouldn't put things in my way. We don't write the same. We don't even think the same in terms of particular nuances, how we would express ourselves, because I would have added into that terrible bleak picture something Mike didn't put in, which is worth mentioning as well. And that's the question of the climate crisis. So this week I read 60 leading climate scientists have said we've got 3 years as a species. If we don't get our act together within 3 years, then we're over 1.5. And from 1.5, we're into 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. And here we are, we're sweltering, even in London, for God's sake. So, yeah. And where are the parties? Now, Rosa Luxemburg is, of course, famous for using the phrase socialism or barbarism. I've put in my article useful little link saying that most likely the originator of that particular phrase was Karl Kautsky, because she claims it was Frederick Engels. The point isn't there. It's not about who coined it originally, though. But this point was made in a situation where social democracy thought that, yeah, there is the danger of war, but the chances are overwhelmingly that we are about to win. The working class is about to win socialism. And what we'll be talking about, in the 20th century is the rule of the working class, is a transition to full communism. Well, looking at the situation now with the threat of big power nuclear exchange, with the threat of global climate crisis, with no mass party culture, I don't think Mike was bending things to the point of miserablism, of where he was pacifying people. If I was going to criticize Mike for anything, and I will here, I would actually say that the danger of simply saying that, well, we have a tiny chance and we don't have very long, is that actually what it encourages isn't pacifism and resignation, it's impatience. And I can well understand impatience at the present time. And it's very easy for us, for example, to look at the tiny little glimmers of hope that was brought about by forging communist unity and get impatient. We are trying to urge comrades to be patient in this very frustrating situation where we see the left not uniting, of where we see split producing split. But nonetheless, we are determined to continue the discussions. And if we're in the wrong, if there's something so terrible about our CPGB culture, come along. Come along to these forums. These forums are open to comrades on the left. Come along, of course, where we've got a jointly organized school in August, Communist University, organized jointly this year by a committee of 3, CPGB, no majority, TAS, Pro-Talks, wing, Prometheus. Come along and argue things out at that school. A week of openings, a week of varied speakers, plenty of time to debate. This is the way forward. So we have to have some degree of patience, even though the situation cries out for very quick action, very quick progress. I'm convinced that if we can make a qualitative step forward, things will start to fall in place. But the first step, as they say, is always the hardest. And I don't think we've made the first step yet, but we can make that first step. And I'm going to finish there. My own take on this story being pumped, by the BBC and all sorts of people about the split in Trump's base. I just think it's, to use a good old Anglo-Saxon phrase, it's bollocks. So that's my own take. Look, it reminds me, I can remember years back, just after Trump won, Trump, i.e. the first presidency, and there was the wall. Do you remember his slogan? Build the wall, build the wall. And I said, this was not an online, this was a live communist forum that takes you back, doesn't it? In the Cowthorpe Arms in Gray's Inn Road. And one comrade said, I said, the wall will never be built. They're not going to build it. They'll put bits up. They won't build it. They won't finish it. And the comrade said to me, well, if they don't finish it, then Trump will lose his base. And they'll all go, and I know he lost second time, but no, I'm sorry. I just don't buy that. I don't buy that line at all. There will be isolationists. There's no doubt about it. But in terms of Trump's base, this is war. And, if, and it is a big if, and I'm glad that Ian qualified his, the vote isn't binding. But if Iran does that, what do we expect the American masses to do? Go, oh dear, and I'm talking about the Republican masses, oh dear, Trump's got us. No, they'll blame the mad mullahs. They will blame the Ayatollah. They will rally round the flag in the same way that we see this massive demonstration on Friday in Tehran. That's a terrible result of war, that the initial phase is a wave of chauvinism. And the idea, I mean, where does the Republican base go? To Bernie Sanders? To AOC? No, I just don't buy it. I'm sorry. Well, I'm not. That's my honest. So I don't know what I'm talking about, of course, Paul D'Amate. I don't know what Paul D'Amate will come up with. I said to him, look, I don't know what you think, but this is my view. But you write, as you always do, your own thing, and sometimes I agree, but I always enjoy reading you. And so he'll come up with his own take on it. But as I say, that's my take. So I'm glad that you've raised that, Bob. I did raise the question, or we did discuss this question on the PCC, and I don't know whether I used the B term, but comrades agreed with me that at least our collective assessment, could be wrong, is no, we don't see Trump suffering some sort of debilitating split. And the fact of the matter is that, at least according to the law, I think as it stands in the United States, he's done his 2 terms. He's not eligible for a third. He could change the constitution either by getting the states to agree and whatever the percentages is and all the rest of it, or declare, I don't know. But he is getting old, like all of us. And he's a little bit older than me. And there's all this talk about him not being well. So I don't know, Bob, but I don't think that he will be debilitated by the fear that his base is, draining away. My expectation is that in the middle of a war, people rally to the flag. As to economically, this isn't going to affect the United States. You know, the United States is self-reliant on oil, or certainly doesn't need the Middle East. The point about the Middle East is that the United States needs to control it, as Mike keeps explaining, because it can strangle others, China and Europe. That's the crucial question. The United States is either the largest, second largest, or third largest producer of oil. So either it's Russia first, Saudi Arabia, then the United States. Either way, glad you asked the question. Okay, yes, I'm glad that Mike came in also with the they might not love us as long as they fear us. And I think that's what's going on. And the left really needs to learn that lesson as well, that the United States seems to be, under this president, discarding the what's the word, the cloak of we want to be like, that this is all legal and above board. We're now dealing with, look, I'm strong, and if you don't like it, lump it. So that is a change. And what that poses to me on the left is we need our own understanding of that we need our own strength. I mean, if you look back at the days of Marx and Engels, they could talk, and I can't remember which number it was, but they could talk about the working class being the fifth or the sixth power, with the emphasis on power. We were a power, in the late 19th century into the 20th century. We're not a power now. We need to become a power, and we need to rely on our strength, which precisely, isn't simply how many nuclear weapons have we got? We got nil. What we've got is ideas, and we can get into the heads, not only of the troops, the rank and file troops, in the state corps in the United States, in Britain. We can penetrate higher. We can penetrate into MI5, MI6. So that's our power, but we need power. Demonstrations, great, but we need more than that. We need to become the ruling class. The working class needs to become the ruling class, and we need a strategy for that. And precisely what I've argued is a strategy for working class power in Iran in isolation is suicidal. And so we need not only to reach out to the rest of the Middle East, precisely we need to reach into Israel. Precisely we need to, reach into Britain, into the United States. So that we need a global strategy. And that's a big ask, of course it is, but we're all in it. We're all in it together. Palestine Action. There were a lot of placards out yesterday. I think you were there, Bob. I was certainly taking pictures, and NECAP, solidarity with NECAP, solidarity with All Palestine Action. Personally, I wouldn't characterize them as terrorist. I know what Tina means, but I don't, I'm not going to die on my sword on this one. They're elitist. That is certainly true. And I would disagree with Ian on that. Because you're illegal doesn't mean that you are more infiltratable, or did you say less? I can't remember. But no, it's if you're elitist, you're infiltratable. It doesn't matter whether you're illegal or not. I mean, the example I would give, it's my standard one, I'm sorry for being so Russian, is the Bolshevik parliamentary fraction, which was infiltrated. It was led by a police agent, right? So yeah, we can be infiltrated because you're underground. But the advantage was that even with someone who'd infiltrated, who'd become an agent of the secret police, he still had to read out speeches written by Lenin. And the difference was that if you take the combat wing of the socialist revolutionaries, it was also infiltrated. But that meant that they just arrested everybody. Well, you couldn't arrest the Duma deputies because they had immunity, and you couldn't arrest the working class that was on the receiving end of Pravda because it was allowed by law to reproduce the speeches of Duma deputies. So it's not about illegality and legality, it's about elitist actions, and it's about how you exploit legal possibilities. So the problem with Palestine Action, of course, they're brave actions, and it sends a certain message, but it has to be a limited message. And the danger is precisely they get infiltrated, they get banned, and the lesson then becomes that if you defy the law, you end up with 14-year sentences. And that we've seen the result with Just Say No to Oil. So I don't know what they're going to do. But the idea that they disbanded because they were so successful, I think, well, we all applaud them, but no one believes that. Okay, Moshe, yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up some Israeli intelligence voices on that. But I mean, it's surely obvious, isn't it, that I mean, we've seen the Cold War. So the idea that Iran would be so different, or North Korea could launch nuclear missiles against the South, but it doesn't, does it? That's the point of it. And I'm not in favor of nuclear weapons, but that's the point of these nuclear weapons. It's meant to be, if you touch us, we'll whomp you. So don't touch us. That's the message that they're meant to send. And there's a truth there, a truth. Of course, when you do touch and you then have all these disastrous consequences that can end, humanity, that's the danger of it. Just on what Tina was saying, I don't think that the fusion process is ended. I think that, I mean, my own way, the way I would express it is we're in a difficult patch. And we need patience, and we don't want to be declaring that things are at an end. And in my view, if a majority or a minority declare it's at an end, we carry on and we invite others in. And I think that I cannot speak on behalf of the pro-talks wing of Prometheus. We're dealing with tiny numbers, but I don't think things are over. I think communist fusion is an objective necessity. We've never taken the view that all that's going to happen is that comrades are going to join the CPGB. We've never had that view. I've never argued, oh, just join. Of course, I want people to join the CPGB, but we've talked about a process of splits and fusions. And so that's been our expectation. We expect groups to emerge. We've never taken the view that if we've got co-thinkers to some degree, for example, in the SWP, leave, pack up your bag, just split. We've taken the opposite view. We've taken the view, stay in and fight. And we've got comrades. Again, I don't know how strong, I don't know. I admire them. And I think they're doing the right thing. The comrades in RS21 have established a faction. And, they're inspired by the comrades in the USA who are inspired by us. And that's great. And we wouldn't want them to leave. We want them to carry out a struggle to win over RS21. So communist fusion is not over. It's a sticky patch. And we want the comrades, all of the comrades, to come to communist unity. And if we are the problem, that we're easy to expose, and we can learn, so it's like my friend Nick Rack says, is the CPGB perfect? And he answered it himself. He said, no, we're all nodding, but he's saying it can become better. And we all nodded, and we agree with that. So of course we can become better, but all we're saying, I mean, this question of language and polemics. Look, we've got to accept that, that polemics will happen. I mean, my understanding is that comrades in various groups are calling each other all sorts of names, And I've expressed the opinion today at the PCC, not recorded, but I have put it to the comrades on the PCC. I wouldn't put it like that. I'd be much more polite about my differences. Maybe I'm just maybe I'm being too generous to myself, but I don't think so. Either way, no, things aren't over. They're only just beginning, actually. Okay, use of the word defense. I think it is worthwhile using the word "we will defend Iran," and I've tried to put it in a particular way that does distinguish it from those that want to defend the regime. So I've used the illustration of the flag. I don't know what you saw, Bob, or you, Mike, or Yasmin, and we had comrades giving out the paper on yesterday's demonstration. I saw quite a lot of examples of left groups that were saying defend Iran, that were marching with the Islamic Republic flag, for example. Now, we want to make our position clear that we're not of that, but we are defending Iran. And yeah, we are there. We're saying that there needs to be measures to put in place to defend its integrity. Not by more dictatorship, not by more repression, but precisely by democracy, that we want the unity of Iran to be voluntary. That's strong unity as opposed to weak unity. We want a situation of where there's social solidarity. So again, someone who knows more about it than I do, not because they were there, but because of relatives and friends and comrades, was saying, and I used the example of COVID-19, that in COVID-19, because of the failures of the state, people acted themselves and formed local committees, looked after each other. Well, in the midst of a bombing campaign, in the midst of siege warfare, it would be natural for people in southern Tehran, for example, to start looking after the old people, to start looking after the infirm, start looking at where suitable bomb shelters could be declared, all of that stuff. But that also needs to be added to a political program. So, for example, we've raised in my supplement, this is a result of discussion. We'll come out with a statement this week. Agreeing a statement is quite difficult, but we put in, for example, the question of the state reversing privatization, but we also talked about the confiscations in the situation of non-wage payment. We talked about strict price limits. We talked about rationing, not just being on the basis of what it is today, as I understand it, on the basis of price, but on the basis of need. Bread, rice, basic staples ought to be distributed on the basis of need. Now, that's something that the left in Iran, with the present very limited space, I won't call it democratic space, but space that exists in society, that space exists now, that such a call could be raised. And it could be raised precisely in the name of defending the country, not the regime, the country. And you can call that we're defending the peoples of Iran. I don't mind doing that. But also I'm trying to, nuance a bit, because Iran is under attack as a state. So, okay. Now, the point I've made about the Russian stuff is, of course, Lenin was quite right, that so-called revolutionary defensism had nothing to do with the revolution. The right-wing Mensheviks and the right-wing socialist revolutionaries actually, were acting on behalf of Tsarism, and it was proved when the Tsar fell that they were acting on behalf of Anglo-French imperialism. But we know also that when the Tsar fell, the Bolsheviks changed their line. Now, you could argue, was the line wrong in terms, well, the argument is that revolutionary defeatism and I have a certain sympathy for that, fitted in Switzerland in terms of the factional position of various groups. And certainly when it came to Ukraine, I've used that argument that we need an absolute division between ourselves and the social imperialists, but we also need a division between us and those that want to be soft on social imperialism. So, you know, yeah, I'm making a very nuanced judgment here, but hey, that's what I'm doing. Well, that's what the PCC, I should say. I think that the PCC is agreed on that. And again, just to make the point, it doesn't matter from our point of view who attacked first. I mean, that is extremely important in terms of okay, international law, that matters. But you get into everything goes back, and so who did what first? The point is that Israel is determined on the destruction of Iran, and the United States is determined to back Israel, and that's what we're seeing at the present time. And I think the United States has been determined, you know, certainly to get revenge on this regime since 1979, certainly since the hostage siege. It's wanted revenge. Slogans yesterday, I'll finish with this. This is for Ben. I don't think there's been any change simply because the organizations concerned haven't caught up. So in terms of the front, they're the same demands, same banners as throughout. In terms of the mass of the demonstration, what you get is the wonderful creativity of ordinary people. So as well as the organizations producing their placards, and you've got, you know, Defend Iran placards being made, the creativity of ordinary people with cardboard is quite wonderful. And, you know, I have to say that I admire, you know, the speed and the, how should I put it, the political creativity of people in that circumstance. So you had a mix of how should I put it, the standard slogans at the front that have been the same since the thing hit off, you know, way back a couple of years ago, and then the brilliant creativity. And I'll just say this, I'm going to finish with this one, coinciding with the demonstration, and it was this demonstration of 350,000 was held up. I was at the front. I don't know, you're nodding there, Bob. I don't know if you were there, but we had the Dykes march. This is an alternative to Gay Pride, I understand it, and I went with that demonstration. Loads of them, right? Free Palestine, Dykes for Palestine, Dykes against the war. So again, this is an example of people's creativity. And so although there was two separate demonstrations, it was really one demonstration. I don't know what the Dykes did afterwards, whether they had a party or whether they joined the demonstration, but they were with us politically, as well as in spirit. So I thought it was, you know, it was a bit like a carnival of the oppressed. That was my impression. It was hot, it was exhausting, but people were there with a fighting and an optimistic spirit. Even though they didn't know what was going to come, they sort of did. You know, we all sort of knew that Trump wouldn't just turn around and say, hey, you know, I'm not going to. We all suspected, you know, not hoped, but suspected that that's what was going to happen. And we all suspect that things are going to get grim. And yet we're defiant. So I think that was the spirit of yesterday's demonstration. So I found it really uplifting in terms of a demonstration. It wasn't there was nothing routine or staid about it. Anyway, thanks, Bob.